The Chicago Bulls may have just made an absolutely massive mistake, as it's now up to 30 months without a trade going through for the organization. I'm your host, Joey Mercer. We're going to break down everything that you need to know about yesterday's trade deadline and what the Chicago Bulls had to do with it. This is another episode of Bulls Digest, of course, and before we get into it there today, I just want to say thank you to everyone that has subscribed to the channel. And we have cut down the gap of how many people that have watched these videos that aren't subscribed. So thank you to everyone who has watched these videos and subscribed to the channel, as we are on the road to 2,000 subs now officially, and it's only 80% of you that watch these videos now that are not subscribed. So thank you very much to everyone who has subscribed as of late. And we're going to continue to bring you all the news that you need on the Chicago Bulls for the unforeseeable future. And without further ado, let's get into what you need to know about the trade deadline yesterday, which brings us into the topic of recap of yesterday's mess. So that's really the best way I could think of describing it, is it was just an absolute mess. The Bulls haven't made any moves, as I just mentioned a second ago, in 30 months, and it was actually the 2021 season. Off season, that is. It doesn't make any sense for this team not to have made any moves, and we've talked pretty heavily about trade rumors, and you're not going to hear any of those now until the off season, of course, unless something major comes up. But I wouldn't say there's going to be too much trade talk here on Bulls Digest, but stranger things have definitely happened. When we look into this, actually, the first thing I wanted to bring up was an article by ESPN, and that was Jamal Collier over there saying Bulls stand pat at NBA trade deadline for third straight year. So they're just not making any moves, of course, and with Lavine down with an injury, I didn't expect anything massive to happen, but once again, I had high hopes that it would have happened. When we look into this, it says the Chicago Bulls did not make a move ahead of Thursday's NBA trade deadline, the third consecutive year the team has stood pat at the deadline. Bulls Vice President Arturas Karnisovas reiterated several times during a video call with reporters shortly after the deadline that he was happy with the way the team was playing recently, and his intentions were for it to remain competitive, despite the Bulls entering Thursday in ninth place in the Eastern Conference at 24-27. We would take a step back, which we don't want, Karnisovas said. We want to stay competitive. We have an obligation to the city to stay competitive and compete for the playoffs. And I don't know why he thinks that the city just wants them to always remain competitive and in a playoff push. If you're in a play-in spot, you might as well either take the next step to trade for a star so you can be an actual playoff and championship contender, or if not, you need to take a step back and kind of, at the very least, retool if you aren't going to rebuild. It can be on the fly, and you can try something like that. They decided to do neither and stay where they are, and it seems like they're going to be in this purgatory of staying right around the play-in, just outside or barely in the playoffs, which is not what you want to be as a team. You aren't getting any better, you aren't acquiring prospects to really help you get better immediately, and realistically, you aren't doing anything to help the fan base, because right now they're expecting the same outcome from the team almost every single year, as no moves are being made. Players are getting older, and we're losing players for nothing in free agency, which seems what's going to happen for players like DeMar DeRozan this offseason. Next thing we saw on this was, it's a result-driven business, and I get it, he said. I'll take responsibility for failures, but at this point it's very early to say what's success, what's not success. We have 30 games to go. We'll see what this team can do. The Bulls are the only team not to make a trade the week of the trade deadline in the last 3 seasons, according to research by ESPN Stats and Information. The Heat and Cavaliers have not made deals specifically on deadline day, but they made deals right before it. Bulls guard Zach Lavine, who had been one of the most talked about names all season leading up to the trade deadline, in November expressed his frustration with the team's losing record and did not answer questions earlier this season about whether he wanted to be traded. Yet Lavine was limited to 25 games because of injuries and underwent foot surgery on Thursday, according to Karnisovas, which begins the star guard's 4 to 6 month recovery timeline. So that's another thing too. This is a sample size of showing if this team is capable to do it or not. Teams can go on big runs, and they went on a small one when Lavine was out and kind of when he started to come back into the lineup again. But it doesn't seem like this team is going to be the team to do it, so why not make some minor changes at the very least? Something has got to give. You can't just expect the team to just outperform how they've done so far this year. We're in the 9th spot, and a lot of that had to do with Lavine not being in the lineup and the team outperforming itself. And Kobe White playing so well. Is that going to be sustainable for the whole team to kind of pick things up again? I'm not so sure. I think some sort of move really needed to be made. Whether it had been just a small move, I think something needed to happen. Sitting exactly where you're to is not giving your fans a great product, and that's not exactly what I'm here to support at Bulls Digest. Next thing we saw in this was Caruso added that he has a great relationship with Lavine and did not have any concerns going forward with Lavine remaining in the organization. We are better with Zach on the team, Caruso said. The Bulls did hold exploratory calls with teams leading up to the deadline on a few other players, including Andre Drummond and Alex Caruso, sources told ESPN. Though Chicago remained reluctant to move Caruso in its desire to push for a playoff spot, the Bulls prioritized getting players in return instead of draft capital. So once again, they're just very stubborn, and they want to, especially Caruso, it seems from what we've heard from him, want to kind of remain where they are or try to get better just by on the fly moving for other players that are of the same value, maybe a different fit. It can sometimes work, but it's not always the greatest idea. In this situation, I don't think it was. I agree holding on to Drummond was the best situation because teams were offering like 2 seconds, which really isn't doing us much right now, and we wouldn't have a backup center. Moving Caruso, maybe it could have been a good idea, but I also am okay with him staying put on the team right now because I don't feel like the right value is coming back in our situation. But as far as the relationship between Karnisovas and Lavine, the analytics, the stats, anything that you want to look at does not show that this team is better with Zach Lavine on it. This team is actually much worse with him on it. The record this year is very negative as opposed to a slightly positive record with him out of the lineup, and that's not even with someone coming in to play those minutes. It's just a bench player coming up. We're not doing anything besides giving more minutes to the players already on the team, and the team is better without its quote-unquote star guard. That is not what you want in this league. That is not what you want a player getting almost $50 million next year, and that is something that they really need to look into in this offseason when they look to move Zach Lavine. You can't just keep him on the team if he's unwilling to play defense. His off-ball defense is some of the worst that I've ever seen, and then offensively he is very good, don't get me wrong, but he's taking away shots as well when hero ball comes to effect, and DeRozan does this sometimes as well, but DeRozan is far more adjusted and more efficient on those shots. When you look at Lavine taking some of these shots, it's not the greatest idea. It takes shots away from other people. There was a game that went to overtime, I believe, against the Rockets about a month ago, when Kobe White was on absolute fire. Didn't give him the ball. Lavine chucks up a shot. We go to overtime. Against the Timberwolves, Kobe White could have ended the game in regulation. DeMar DeRozan takes a shot. No, not the greatest look. We go to overtime, and the Bulls did come out with the victory in both of those, but that's not the point. These games shouldn't be going to overtime. You shouldn't be taking away shots from players with a hot hand, and just because you're a star player doesn't mean you can't defer to other people. Even LeBron James in this league, if he has somebody open in the corner, he's going to pass the ball. If somebody has the hot hand, he's willing to play make. That's what separates good players from great players, and right now the Bulls are happy just having good players on the team and will not exercise players that are coming up. Like Kobe White needs more. He needs more right now. We cannot just be happy with this team being mediocre. It needs to get better. Changes need to happen ASAP, and at the very earliest this offseason, or the Bulls are going to be completely lost for years to come. They are going to be in a forever rebuild, just like they didn't want to do after Jordan left in 98. And this is exactly where this team's been. We had Rose. We made a really good push. He got injured. Ever since then, we've made very minimal moves to do anything to help this franchise. And honestly, the front office is completely to blame for this. Karnisovas not wanting to rebuild is absolutely ridiculous. And he should look into maybe, I don't know, finding a different position for him in the league if he's not willing to adjust with this team. You can't continue to get paycheck to paycheck from the Chicago Bulls if you're giving them a poor product and giving their fan base a worse product. But moving forward, and the next thing that we saw in this was Chicago also held on to forward DeMar DeRozan, who can become an unrestricted free agent this summer. It mirrored the way the Bulls never seriously engaged with the idea of moving veteran Nikola Vucevic at the deadline last season, despite his expiring contract, and gave him a new 3-year deal in the offseason. On Thursday, Karnisovas signaled his intention to follow a similar path, expressing a desire to re-sign DeRozan, who turns 35 in August. I love DeMar DeRozan said. He's huge for this team, for the city, for the organization. He's been great for a young guy. He's been our closer. I think it's wonderful for this team. I think when the time comes, we have a chance to keep him. And that's something to mention as well. We're going to get into that a little bit more in the latter part of this video. But DeMar DeRozan's going to be 35 years old. He is not your franchise guy necessarily anymore. It's time for him to start taking a backseat to Kobe White, who has shown that he is ready in this season, which is exactly the wrong mindset in Karnisovas. He's taking these guys that were the big three that had former success and thinks that they have to be the top players. Things change. Players get older. Injuries happen. You need to adjust. Next thing that we saw in this was Karnisovas began his stint as an executive in Chicago by aggressively remaking the roster, keeping only Zach Lavine and Kobe White from the team he inherited in April 2020. However, the Bulls have made only one trade since August 2021, acquiring the draft rights to select Julian Phillips in the second round of the 2023 draft. While we did in 2021, the summer, when we turned our roster around, I think we showed we can be aggressive, Karnisovas said. You can't come out and say that you're being aggressive and then make no moves ever since then. That wasn't necessarily an aggressive move. They made proper moves, which they should be doing every season. This team right now, it's crazy how Karnisovas is coming out and talking about them. I can't really even fathom it myself that he's saying that it shows that we can be aggressive. That's several years ago now. Lonzo's gone down with an injury. Lavine's gone down with an injury. You need to make changes. This team is not the team he thinks it is. And what is he, just expecting Lonzo Ball to guarantee be exactly where he was before? It is going to take time if he comes back at all for that matter, because that's really been up in the air. Next thing we saw was, I'm always going to look at how to improve the team. For now, what makes us more competitive, and for the future, we didn't have those options available. Karnisovas stated that he has the green light from ownership to enter a full rebuild, but he continues to double down on his faith in the core of Lavine, DeRozan, and Vooch. The Bulls have been to one playoff series and won one playoff game in the past 3 seasons. And a lot of that had to do with their point guard being Lonzo Ball at the time, who really helped this team, especially in the net rating category. When we look at these three, they're one of the worst big threes in the entire NBA in net rating. They are a negative overall in the minutes that they've played. They've played a lot of minutes together. They've been given a lot of chances. And for him to think that that's the team that's going to do it, he's clearly not looking at anything. He is stuck in some sort of fantasy that he thinks that the team that he's built is the team that's going to win a championship, and it's simply not the case. There's no data that represents that that is the case. Whatever he is thinking is kind of delusional and doesn't make any sense. Me, as a Bulls fan myself, I don't agree with what he's coming out and saying here at the trade deadline. It really frustrated me seeing that there yesterday, and the fact that he is in this complete other world. I don't know what he is thinking, but those things are not accurate at all. This trio has not gotten things done and have been given too many chances to date. When we look into the next part of this and the end of this ESPN article, it says, and furthermore, since Lonzo Ball, who Karnisovas said hopefully in a perfect world will be ready to play next season, was injured in January 2022, the Bulls are 84-93 in the regular season. A shakeup doesn't guarantee your success, Karnisovas said. Words like rebuild and all this stuff is thrown around. I think this group gives you the best chance to compete. And once again, just absolutely inaccurate. Nothing is stating that. As you can see, the 84-93. He said in a perfect world, Lonzo Ball come back. So he doesn't even believe in Lonzo Ball, who honestly was the most efficient player out of all those guys that have been on the team. Really was the glue guy to keep the big three together. He was almost making it a big four, essentially. And now we'll look at this, the team, like that big three hasn't gotten things done. I have no idea what Karnisovas is looking at. I'd love to see those numbers, because those numbers are not available to the public, that's for sure. We have seen that this big three can't get things done, and I cannot stress enough that it is time to make a move on from them. He has got to stop being stubborn with this, and if not, it is time for him to move on from the Chicago Bulls organization. Next thing we saw was Bill Simmons says the Bulls' trade hesitancy for their players is the dumbest thing of the year. Veteran sport analysts dropped a take on the Bulls' trade stance and their stubbornness. And honestly, it is the dumbest thing of the year for them not to move on from things. Everybody is saying they should move on from it, and it's not just the media talking. It is true. The numbers are there. This team is not the team that's going to get it done, and they should have made a move. I don't believe that the right move wasn't there. Making any sort of move at all could have been the right move. You don't know until it's executed. Unless we're offered something like a second-round pick for DeRozan or something really lowballed, then why not try to make a move? If you're offered something of value that can shake it up, and you might think it's the same value, still, it could shake things up for the team, could make a difference. Try to make some moves. Saying that this whole rebuild is being thrown around, yes, people talk about rebuilds a lot, but in the Bulls situation, they at the very least need to retool. This is not the squad to get it done. I don't know how you could think it is. The next thing that we saw in this was they should be trading everyone on their team. The Bulls not putting everyone up for sale right now on the trade deadline is probably the dumbest thing of the year, other than everything San Antonio tried to do with their point guard situation this year, he said in the latest episode of his The Bill Simmons podcast. Now, as far as this being they should have put everybody up for sale, not so sure about that, but they should have put up a lot of players up for sale this year on the trade market. Should have tried to move multiple pieces. You can't hold on to everybody. And now we also have Patrick Williams, who we haven't heard much about being traded, who wants a lot of money in the offseason, and we might lose him in free agency for absolutely nothing, which is great. The next thing we saw was all these guys should be available. They should try to trade DeRozan. They should be keeping Kobe White. Maybe that's it. I know they can't trade Lavine because after consulting with the Clutch Sports Agency, Lavine decided to have foot surgery or whatever they did, but I would trade these other guys. And that's a good point too. I mean, you could see that Lavine with the injury, I didn't expect him to be moved at the deadline. That is absolutely accurate. DeRozan should have been moved. Keeping Kobe White at all costs, he should be Mr. Untouchable for us right now. He is on an absolutely phenomenal contract and is coming up in the ranks, and he's going to be worth a very good contract at the end of his contract if he keeps up the play that he has shown so far, and that is a good take, honestly, by Bill Simmons. The first part, I don't agree with everybody being moved, but a lot of players definitely should have been available. Next thing was insider shares. The Chicago Bulls tried to acquire Jonathan Kuminga in a trade involving Alex Caruso. At least the Bulls gave it a shot. Now, I heard rumblings earlier on this year that the Warriors were willing to trade Jonathan Kuminga, but he's been on an absolutely hot tear as of late. He's been phenomenal. So trying to get him for Caruso isn't going to be what the Warriors are going to want to do. The Warriors are trying to change things around, but they are out of a play-in spot right now, and the record last time I checked was 21-25. For them to move on from Kuminga, who's young and putting up points and fitting well next to Curry as of late, wouldn't make much sense, and the Bulls would have to add things on top of it. However, it seemed like the Bulls had a different idea of Caruso's trade value, who, believe me, I think is still very good, but that of Jonathan Kuminga, who's very young and showing a lot of promise, not necessarily the right take. We can see here that in exploratory trade talks with the Golden State Warriors centered on Caruso, league sources said the Bulls inquired about Jonathan Kuminga's availability. That was rebuffed, and the Bulls made clear in talks with all teams that they didn't want to trade Caruso, especially for a package on perhaps other young pieces like Moses Moody. So they need to be floored by an offer to do so, Johnson wrote. And I wouldn't move him for Moses Moody either. I would want Kuminga if it was in it, but I do believe we would have to make some other moves, like some other draft picks to go back their way, maybe a third team involved, something like that for sure. But Moses Moody's still a very good player. It's a solid offer, but I'm okay with the Bulls staying put on that. Moses Moody could have been a very good player for the Bulls had it been the right pieces kind of being shifted around. But if they want to stay competitive, I guess they're going to hold on to Alex Caruso. But I just hope this doesn't come back to bite them, because right now his trade value has been about as high as it possibly has been. And I hope they haven't turned down anything too major throughout this trade deadline fiasco, Next thing we saw was, in addition to Caruso, Johnson noted that the Bulls also fielded calls on center Andre Drummond and had some cursory conversations about veteran shooting guard DeMar DeRozan. However, the market for both players dwindled when other deals were completed, Johnson shared. So it kind of seems like, from what was reported there, that they really waited, they didn't take on deals, and then they were offered less because other deals around the league were made, and teams were basing it on the trade values of those other players, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, You could see, like, if a trade yesterday happened for, like, Alec Burks, for example, maybe Drummond's value went down because of something like that. When you look at different solid bench players on the Knicks, I mean, they got Bojan Bogdanovic. Maybe they're comparing DeRozan to somebody like that. DeRozan is better, don't get me wrong, but maybe that's what other teams were doing, and maybe that's why the offers were getting so much lower. And look at the next part here. We could see from diehard Chicago Bulls fans tweeted what The Athletic had said, saying DeMar DeRozan wants to return if the money is right, per The Athletic. DeMar will turn 35 this summer as he enters unrestricted free agency. And that's not exactly what you want to see either as a Bulls fan. DeMar, obviously 35 years old. He's starting to get older. He's still playing at a very good rate. Don't get me wrong. He's putting up about 22 points a game. I mean, he's been solid this season. His field goal percentage has gone down about 4%. He is taking more threes, however, at the same percentage, but it's about an attempt more a game. So it's kind of okay. I do expect it to go up about another percent or two as he started off to a really rough start to the season. But overall, I really do think that DeMar DeRozan wanting the money to be right states that he's going to want a good amount of money out of the Chicago Bulls team, which is not exactly what this team is going to be willing to pay. They really are cutting corners, cutting pennies. They're trying to save whatever they can, and I really do think that DeMar DeRozan will not be back with the Chicago Bulls next year based on that, and that's not exactly great news because we're not going to be getting any value for him, and I feel like there was some value on the table for sure. Last thing we saw on this to wrap it up there today is the Bulls also want to keep DeRozan long-term. Long-term, per Shams. Long-term. So, DeMar DeRozan is 35 years old. Realistically, left in the tank, he probably has 3 or 4 years max. I can't see him playing past 38, 39. He's still very good right now. But we've seen it with tons of players so far. LeBron James is playing at a very good rate, but he's a one-of-a-kind, type of player. Kareem, when he started to get towards that age, really slowed down just out of nowhere. Just kind of stopped rebounding, really slowed down a lot, retired from the game. Karl Malone, who was at nearly an MVP pace when he left Utah, joins the Lakers, and then that's just his last year because he's 40 years old. This happens to some players, the players with those really longevity type careers, and you don't see it. Like, people when Karl Malone was 35 years old were like, oh my god, he might play another 10 years. But obviously he played another 5 years, and his last year was a real big dip-off, albeit on that 04 Lakers team. But with DeRozan, we have to be realistic. He can't be on the team long term. Maximum, this is 3 or 4 years. I'm not sure what they mean by long term, but long term for me means 4, 5, 6 years. And at that stage, are we really getting much production out of DeRozan, or are we overpaying a old wing in this league? That's something that they have to look at. I really hope that you all enjoyed the episode there today, and share your takes with me down below. I really want to hear what other Chicago Bulls fans and other fans around different teams around the league, for that matter, have to say about this. This was crazy to me yesterday, and I really had to take a day to kind of digest it because it really didn't make any sense to me. Kind of gather my thoughts and see what I had to say about it afterwards. And I hope that you did like some of my takes on this today. If you disagree, that's fine. Let me know what you thought down below in the comments. Like the video if you did enjoy it there today. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all in the next one. Signing out.